I came home from a work trip to find my husband had changed the entire nursery theme to match his mother's taste. She smiled and said, "I told him you were too immature for parenthood." I stared at the $5,000 receipt and said, "That's fine. I'll just raise the baby somewhere you're not." Her smile disappeared instantly. I was exhausted when I got home. My flight back from Seattle had been delayed twice, turning what should have been a 3-hour journey into a never-ending ordeal. My phone had died somewhere between the layover in Denver and the taxi ride home, leaving me completely cut off from the world. By the time I pulled into the driveway, the street was quiet and the house was dark except for the faint glow of a light upstairs. I sighed, rubbing my temple. All I wanted was a hot shower, a warm bed, and maybe a few minutes of feeling my daughter kick before I passed out. The past few days had been nothing but back-to-back meetings, business lunches, and sleepless nights in a hotel room that smelled like someone else's perfume. I had spent most of the trip missing Julian, missing home, missing the feeling of his hand on my belly, grounding me. But the moment I stepped inside, something felt off. The air in the house was different, too still, too sterile. Normally, at this time, Julian would be sprawled out on the couch, watching some show he insisted I would love if I just gave it a chance. He'd pause at the moment I walked in, greeting me with a tired smile before asking how my trip went. I'd make a joke about how business travel was just an excuse for executives to drink overpriced cocktails and send passive-aggressive emails from a different time zone, and he'd laugh, pulling me into his arms. But tonight, there was no laughter. No TV. No Julian waiting at the door to kiss me hello. I shut the door behind me and listened. Upstairs, faint voices. A woman's voice. I froze, my grip tightening around the strap of my purse. It wasn't the voice itself that made my stomach twist. It was the fact that I recognized it. Eleanor, Julian's mother. A slow, sinking dread crept through my body as I made my way up the stairs. The nursery door was open. The light spilled out into the hallway, warm and inviting, but the second I stepped inside, I felt like I had walked into someone else's home. The room I had spent months carefully putting together, the nursery I had painted with my own hands, the little details I had agonized over, was gone. The soft sage green walls had been painted over with an icy, impersonal shade of blue. The delicate, hand-painted animals that I had spent weeks perfecting, every little brushstroke filled with anticipation for our daughter's arrival, were completely erased, replaced by sterile, impersonal artwork in heavy gold frames. The crib, the one I had searched for endlessly, the one I had pictured our daughter sleeping in, gone. In its place was something massive and ornate, the kind of thing that screamed status more than comfort. Even the curtains were different. The soft, airy ones I had chosen had been replaced with thick, suffocating drapes, blocking out the sunlight. It was suffocating. And in the middle of it all stood Eleanor, her arms crossed, her expression smug. Julian was beside her, his hands in his pockets, shifting uncomfortably like a child who had just been caught doing something he knew was wrong. For a long moment, none of us spoke. I was too stunned to even breathe. It wasn't just the nursery. It was what it meant. It was the fact that while I was gone, my husband had allowed his mother to come into our home and erase me. That he had let her step into my space, my role, and make decisions that weren't hers to make. That he had watched her undo everything I had done, everything we had done, and had done nothing to stop it. And then Eleanor broke the silence. Her voice was light, almost sweet, but the words she spoke sliced right through me. "I told him you were too immature for parenthood." I blinked. It wasn't the words themselves that made my skin go cold, it was the way she said them. So casual, so certain, like it was a fact, something everyone had always known but had been too polite to say out loud. She was smiling. I turned to Julian. He wouldn't meet my eyes. I waited for him to say something, to do something, but he just stood there, letting his mother speak for him, letting her take over as she always had. And then I saw it. A piece of paper on the dresser. A receipt. I stepped forward before either of them could react, picking it up with numb fingers. $5,000. $5,000 spent without a word to me, without a discussion, without a single thought about how I might feel. My chest felt tight. This wasn't just about a nursery. This was about control. About the fact that I had spent my entire pregnancy fighting to have a voice in my own home, in my own marriage. About the fact that Julian had promised that he would stand up for me, that he wouldn't let her steamroll over me the way she had his entire life. And yet, here we were. I exhaled slowly, my fingers tightening around the paper. Then, with a calmness I didn't even know I possessed, I turned to Eleanor and said, "That's fine. I'll just raise the baby somewhere you're not." Her smile disappeared instantly. Julian's head snapped up. "Wait, what?" I looked at him, really looked at him, and felt something inside me settle. I wasn't angry anymore. I was done. I turned on my heel and walked out. I heard Julian calling my name, heard his footsteps behind me, but I didn't stop. I walked down the stairs, past the living room, past the framed wedding photos that suddenly felt like relics from another life. My suitcase was still by the door, exactly where I had left it. I grabbed it without hesitation. Julian reached for my arm, his voice frantic now. Wait, just stop for a second. Let's talk about this." I turned to him, meeting his eyes, and for the first time in a long time, I felt completely and utterly clear. There's nothing to talk about. And with that, I walked out the door. The cold night air hit me the moment I stepped outside. It was sharp and biting against my skin, a stark contrast to the suffocating warmth of the house I had just walked out of. I gripped the handle of my suitcase tightly, my heart pounding against my ribs, but my steps didn't falter. Julian was still behind me. "Please," he said, his voice desperate now. Just stop, okay? Just listen for a second." But I didn't stop. I walked down the driveway, past the car we had bought together last year, past the neatly trimmed lawn that we had argued over because I never cared for perfect grass the way he did. Every step I took felt heavier, like my body was catching up with the weight of what was happening. Julian jogged in front of me, blocking my path. His face was pale, his eyes wide with something that looked dangerously close to panic. "You don't mean this," he said quickly. "You're upset, and I get it, but you don't just walk out over something like this." I let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "Something like this?" I gestured back toward the house. "You let your mother erase me, Julian. You let her erase us." His jaw clenched. "It's just a nursery." I felt my breath catch in my throat. "A nursery. Just a nursery." I stared at him, my hands shaking now, but not with sadness. With something deeper, something more final. "This isn't about the nursery," I said quietly. "This is about you making decisions without me. About you letting her decide what my life, our daughter's life, is supposed to look like." Julian ran a hand through his hair, exhaling sharply. I didn't. He stopped himself, shaking his head. "She just wanted to help. She thought. I don't care what she thought." I cut in, my voice steady. "I care about what you did. About the fact that you let this happen while I was gone. About the fact that you spent our money on something you knew I wouldn't want, without even telling me." For a moment, he looked like he might argue. Like he might try to find the right words to twist this into something smaller, something easier to forgive. But then he swallowed hard, his shoulders slumping. "I thought it would be easier," he admitted. "She kept saying you'd get over it. That once you saw how nice it looked, you'd change your mind." A bitter taste filled my mouth. There it was. The truth. I shook my head slowly. "You didn't think that." "She did." Julian said nothing, because we both knew it was true. I could feel the night pressing in around me, the silence stretching between us like an open wound. A part of me, a small part, wanted him to fix it. To say something, anything, that would make me believe this could still be undone. But he didn't. And that silence told me everything I needed to know. I took a slow step back. Julian's eyes flickered with something unreadable. "Where are you going to go?" His voice was quiet now, less pleading. I lifted my chin. "Anywhere you're not." I watched as those words settled over him, watched the way his body tensed, the way his hands curled into fists at his sides. But he didn't stop me. He didn't chase after me as I turned and walked toward my car. Didn't beg me to stay. Didn't fight for me. I opened the car door, throwing my suitcase into the passenger seat. My hands trembled as I gripped the steering wheel, my breath coming in short, uneven bursts. My entire body was buzzing, my mind racing ahead of me, throwing out questions I didn't have the energy to answer. Where was I going? What was I going to do? How the HLL had it come to this? But underneath all of that panic, all of that uncertainty, there was something else. Relief. I started the car and drove away without looking back. The highway stretched ahead of me, dark and empty. The rhythmic hum of the tires against the pavement should have been soothing, but my mind was anything but calm. My phone was still dead, my body ached from exhaustion, and I had nowhere to go. I just drove. The night blurred around me, streetlights flashing by like ghosts. I could still hear Julian's voice in my head, the way it had cracked just a little when he realized I was really leaving. "Where are you going to go?" It wasn't just a question. It was a challenge. because in his mind, I had nowhere. And maybe he was right. I swallowed hard, gripping the steering wheel. I could go to a hotel, but the thought of sitting alone in a sterile room, staring at the ceiling, made my stomach turn. I could go to a friend's house, but then I'd have to explain. And I wasn't ready for that. Not yet. Then, without thinking, I turned onto a familiar road. 15 minutes later, I pulled into the driveway of a small, modest house with a porch light glowing softly in the dark. My sister's house. I hadn't even realized I was coming here until I was already parked. I let out a slow breath and stepped out of the car, my legs stiff from the drive. Before I could second-guess myself, I knocked. A few seconds passed, then the porch light flickered on. The door swung open to reveal my older sister, Camille, squinting at me in confusion. Her dark hair was tied back in a messy bun, and she was wearing one of those old oversized t-shirts she always slept in. Behind her, the glow of the TV flickered across the living room walls. "Do you have any idea what time it is?" she mumbled, rubbing her eyes. I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came out. Because suddenly it hit me. The weight of everything. The exhaustion. The betrayal. The fact that my entire life had just been torn apart in a single night. And before I could stop myself, my face crumpled. Camille's eyes widened. "Oh, SHT. She stepped forward immediately, grabbing my arm and pulling me inside. Okay, come in. Whatever happened, we'll figure it out." I let her guide me into the house, my body numb. She shut the door behind us and led me to the couch, where I sank down, my limbs heavy. For a few seconds, she just stood there, watching me. Then she sighed and disappeared into the kitchen. A minute later, she came back with a glass of water and set it down in front of me. I took it, staring down at the surface of the water like it held the answers I was looking for. Camille sat down beside me, tucking her legs under her. "All right," she said, her voice softer now. "What happened?" I swallowed hard, trying to find the right place to start. But how did I even explain it? How did I sum up years of slowly eroding boundaries, of fights that always ended with me apologizing even when I knew I was right? How did I put into words the way Julian had always put his mother first, even when it meant putting me second? And how did I explain that tonight was just the final crack in a dam that had already been leaking for a long, long time? I came home, I finally said, my voice hoarse, and the nursery was gone. Camille frowned. "What do you mean gone?" I forced myself to look at her. She changed everything. His mom, she repainted the walls, bought new furniture, replaced everything I picked out. My hands curled into fists in my lap, and Julian let her. Camille's face darkened. "Are you kidding me?" I shook my head. She sat back, rubbing her forehead. Jesus. I always knew he was spineless when it came to her, but this. She let out a sharp breath. "This is next level bull, SHT. I bit my lip, my throat tightening again. I left. Camille glanced at my suitcase, then back at me. "For the night." I hesitated. "I don't know." And that was the truth. Because a part of me was still waiting for the reality of what I'd just done to sink in. To feel real. To make me panic. But it wasn't happening. All I felt was empty. And that emptiness scared me more than anything else. Camille reached over, placing a hand on my knee. "You can stay here as long as you need," she said firmly. "No pressure. No expectations. Just breathe." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "Thanks." She gave me a small, tired smile. Of course. For a while, we just sat there in silence. The TV buzzed softly in the background, playing some late-night rerun neither of us was paying attention to. The house smelled like lavender and old wood, a scent that instantly made me feel safer, like I had just stepped back into childhood. But childhood was over. And tomorrow, I would have to figure out what the hell came next. Camille had insisted I take her bed while she crashed on the couch, but even wrapped in blankets, in the safety of her home, my mind wouldn't shut off. I lay there staring at the ceiling, my body exhausted but my thoughts restless, replaying everything in an endless loop. The nursery, Eleanor's voice, Julian's silence. It didn't matter how many times I went over it, the outcome was always the same. I had left, and he had let me. By the time the first streaks of morning light crept through the curtains, my eyes burned with the weight of a sleepless night. I wasn't sure what time I had finally drifted off, but it wasn't enough. I sat up slowly, stretching out the stiffness in my body. Camille's room was small but familiar, filled with pieces of her that hadn't changed since we were kids. A half-read novel on the nightstand, a coffee mug with a sarcastic quote on it, A framed picture of the two of us from years ago, taken at a beach trip where she had made me wear an awful sun hat. For a brief moment, I wanted to crawl into that picture, back to a time when life felt simpler. Instead, I forced myself to stand up. When I stepped into the kitchen, Camille was already up, leaning against the counter with a cup of coffee in one hand and her phone in the other. She glanced up as I walked in and raised an eyebrow. "You look like HLL. Feel like it, too." My voice was rough from exhaustion. She gestured toward the coffee pot. "Help yourself." I'd offer to make you breakfast, but I think we both know I'd burn it. I managed a weak smile. That was true. Camille's idea of cooking was ordering takeout. I poured myself a cup of coffee, the warmth soothing against my cold hands. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then she sighed, setting her phone down. "All right. Have you talked to him?" I shook my head. "Are you going to?" I took a slow sip of coffee before answering. "I don't know." Camille frowned, crossing her arms. "You do know. You're just afraid to say it out loud." I stared down at my cup, my stomach twisting. Because she was right. I knew I wasn't going back. But saying it, admitting it to someone else felt too big, too real. Camille watched me closely. "Do you want me to be the sister who comforts you or the sister who tells you the truth?" I let out a breath. "The truth." She nodded. "All right. Then here it is. Julian has never put you first. Not since the day you married him." I flinched. But she wasn't done. "He loves you. I'm not saying he doesn't. But he loves her more. Or at least, he's too afraid of her to love you properly. And that's never going to change." I pressed my lips together, my fingers tightening around the mug. I wanted to argue. To tell her it wasn't that simple. That Julian had his good moments, too. That he had tried. But had he really? Had he ever truly fought for me? Or had I just been telling myself that he would someday, while he kept proving over and over that he wouldn't? Camille sighed, her voice softening. "Look, I know this is painful. And I know a part of you wants to believe he'll wake up and finally see what he's done. But even if he does, it's too late, isn't it?" I swallowed hard, because the truth was sitting there, raw and undeniable, between us. Yes, it was too late. I had spent years convincing myself that love was enough. That if I just tried harder, if I was more patient, more understanding, things would get better. But love wasn't the problem. Respect was. And without that, what was left? My phone buzzed suddenly, snapping me out of my thoughts. "Julian." I sucked in a breath, staring at the screen. Camille glanced at it, then back at me. "Are you going to answer?" I hesitated, my heart pounding. Then, slowly, I pressed ignore. Camille nodded approvingly. "Good." I set my phone down on the table, exhaling. For the first time in a long time, I felt something close to peace. But I knew this wasn't over yet. Julian wasn't the type to just let things go. And something told me this was only the beginning. I ignored Julian's call. And then I ignored the next one. And the one after that. By the time my phone had rung for the fourth time, Camille reached over, snatched it off the table, and silenced it. "He doesn't deserve to take up space in your head right now," she muttered, shoving the phone toward me. "Drink your coffee and breathe." I did as she said. The call stopped after a while, but I knew Julian. He wasn't the type to give up easily, at least, not when it came to controlling a situation. And that's what this was, wasn't it? It had never been about the nursery. It was about control. About him and Eleanor making decisions for me and expecting me to just deal with it. Not anymore. Camille let me stay with her for the next few days. At first, I thought I would just need a night or two to clear my head, but the more time I spent away from Julian, the more I realized something. I felt better. No tension. No walking on eggshells. No waiting for the next time Eleanor would wedge herself into my marriage like an uninvited guest who never left. And the more space I had, the clearer everything became. Julian wasn't my partner. He was an extension of his mother. A man who had been conditioned to seek her approval above all else, even at the expense of his own wife. And that was never going to change. The breaking point came when I finally charged my phone and saw the text messages. "Julian, we need to talk. Call me." "Julian, I know you're upset, but don't do anything stupid." "Julian, you're overreacting. This isn't a reason to throw everything away." "Julian, I don't know where you are, but you need to come home so we can fix this." "Julian, Mom is willing to forgive you if you apologize." That was the one that did it. Forgive me? Forgive me? As if I was the one who had done something wrong. As if I was the child who had misbehaved and was now being granted some kind of mercy from Eleanor. I read that text 3 times, each time feeling something inside me harden. Then I did something I never thought I'd do. I called a lawyer. Camille had a friend who specialized in divorce cases. Within a week, I had met with her, laid out everything, and started preparing to leave Julian for good. And not just leave him, I was going to leave him smart. Julian had always assumed I'd never leave because financially I was dependent on him. And to be fair, I had given up a lot to be with him. I had sacrificed job opportunities, moved states, and let him handle most of our finances because, at the time, I thought that's what a good marriage was. But he underestimated me. I still had personal savings. I had contacts. I had options. And I was about to use all of them. The first thing I did was secure a place to stay. Camille's friend had a client who was moving out of a beautiful apartment downtown, and I jumped at the chance to take it. A fresh start. The second thing I did was quietly move my belongings out of the house while Julian was at work. Not everything, just the things that mattered. The sentimental items. The things he wouldn't even notice were gone until it was too late. And the third thing? I took the $5,000 nursery receipt and made sure Eleanor paid for it. Julian had used our joint account to pay for the nursery overhaul without my consent, which meant legally I had every right to reverse the transaction, and I did. I called the bank, explained the situation, and had the charge disputed and reversed as an unauthorized purchase. That money went right back into our account, and then I moved it into a personal account that Julian had no access to. The best part? The refund went directly to the company that had installed Eleanor's perfect nursery. And when they weren't paid for their work, they went straight to her demanding full payment. According to Camille, who heard it through the family grapevine, Eleanor was livid. She called Julian, furious that she had to cover the cost. She ranted about how I was immature and disrespectful and just proving why I wasn't fit to be a mother. Julian, of course, tried to call me, but I had already blocked his number. I filed for divorce a few days later. Julian didn't take it well. At first, he was in denial. He showed up at Camille's house twice, pounding on the door, demanding to talk. When that didn't work, he switched to guilt-tripping, then anger. He even tried sending his mother to talk to me. Big mistake. Eleanor showed up at my new apartment, acting like she was doing me a favor by being there. She barely even knocked, just marched in like she still had control over my life. "You need to stop this nonsense," she said, her tone dripping with condescension. "Marriage is about compromise, and you're throwing everything away over a crib and some paint." I smiled. "No, Eleanor. I'm throwing it away because I refuse to spend the rest of my life in a marriage where you have more power than I do." Her face turned red. "That's not fair." "Oh, it's exactly fair." I tilted my head. "And don't worry, you won't have to deal with me anymore. Julian will be your responsibility now." She didn't have a response to that. She just stormed out, fuming. The divorce went through smoother than I expected. I didn't even have to fight much. Julian knew he was screwed. I walked away with enough money to start over comfortably. The apartment was mine. I got back into a career I actually loved, one that Julian had once dismissed as just a hobby. And the best part? A year later, Julian and Eleanor had a massive falling out. Apparently, without me around as a buffer, their dynamic collapsed. Eleanor was still trying to control every aspect of his life, only now he had no one else to take it out on. No wife to pacify him. No one to stand between them. Camille sent me a text one day with a screenshot of Eleanor's passive-aggressive Facebook post about ungrateful sons who don't appreciate their mothers. I just laughed. Because Julian had chosen her. And now he was stuck with her. Looking back, leaving Julian was the best decision I ever made. Not just because I got away from him, but because I found myself again. I was happy. Truly, genuinely happy. And for the first time in a long time, my life was mine to live on my terms.